there, and welcome back to the Closet Historian and back to my sewing parlor for another project. Now, 'tis the season for something a little bit more luxurious and maybe even a dash decadent, so I decided to allow myself to choose one of the iridescent silks that had been languishing for far too long in my stash. In fact, I've had this piece of silk for a few years now, so I've been waiting quite a while to finally cut into it. And unsurprisingly, I've decided to go for a gathered blouse with a puffy bishop sleeve, which is not so unusual for me, although at least today I'm going to go ahead and cover the hidden button placket again, which I think I've only shown how to do once here on the channel before, so will be a good refresher. But seeing as a simple project like this is surprisingly still rather involved, let's go ahead and get started. And I begin naturally with a sketch and my basic bodice block pattern. I will go ahead and trace a copy of the front to work with here. And this is going to be very similar to other blouses I have made over the years, even in silk here on the channel, because I love to make a puffy silk blouse, honestly. And not out of a floopy silk, but out of a stiff nonsense silk like dupioni or taffeta or shantung. However, I normally throw all of my dartfulness up into gathering at the neckline, and today I'm going to go ahead and split the dartfulness, put the side dart up into the neckline, and leave the waist dart fullness right where it is. I'm just going to leave this dart right here, ignore it, mark an indication an inch out from the dart legs as a sort of note to self for where my gathering needs to be contained later on along my waistband. And yes, I will have a waistband on this blouse today. It ends right at the waist. This is almost more like an 1890s shirt waist, just one meant to be worn with a modern pencil skirt, or A-line skirt, or anything high-waisted, honestly. But this side dart I will put up into the neckline, although I'm going to lower that neckline a ½ inch at the center front first, just because it's better to have this be a little bit too low than a little bit too tight when it comes to having a high collar blouse. Yes, thank you, Sophia. She just jumped on the desk all at once. Hello, my love. She's such a little terror today. Now I will go ahead and have this button down the front with a placket. I'll start by coming out 3/8 of an inch from the center front here. This is going to be the extension I need just to fit my buttons down the center front. Then I will draw another line 3/4 of an inch away from this, and then 3/4 again, and then finally a last 1.5 inch that will be the sort of facing for this placket. And this is a double placket because there will be a little flap that covers the buttons and buttonholes. And thus the front of my blouse is now quite extended. A full 3 inches plus 3 3/8 of an inch outwards from the center front for this particular blouse. I will also go ahead and add a 1/4 inch along the side seam just to give this a little bit of extra ease and room, because I am creating this on my bodice block and I don't want this to fit as tight as perhaps a dress bodice would. So I'm just adding a little bit of extra ease, side seam on both the front and back. Anyhow, I will finally move my side dart up into the neckline, where I'll be using it again as gathering. Plenty of gathering in this. I'm not a huge ruffle fan, but I do like gathering when it's contained and not too puffy, I suppose. And it works especially well with an iridescent fabric because, of course, the more texture you introduce, the more different ways the light is going to hit that fabric, and you'll be able to see the iridescent nature of it all. Close that dart. Now it has opened up into the neckline. You could, of course, sew this as a dart or a tuck if you would like to, but I will just fill this in with extra paper, smooth off the edge, and I will just gather this to fit down into my stand collar when the time comes. And I did leave myself an extra 1/4 inch of angle up here at the shoulder seam just so I can slip a tiny matching shoulder pad in to this blouse at the end. Because I do like a strong shoulder and a slightly 40s silhouette, even when making an 1890s inspired modern blouse. Who knows? Who knows what to call these sort of things? I don't. Here, let me fold this placket into place so you can see exactly what's happening here. So this is where the buttonholes will be in the end. There'll be a little bit of an extra flap on top of that to cover it. And of course I can fold this facing on the inside underneath as well for a completely clean finish along the front. And I'll tape down some of my floops while I'm here, because you don't want those to get stuck on anything and tear your newly finished pattern piece apart. I will also add a 1/4 inch to the length of both my front and back pieces, just because this tracing of my bodice block is a little bit short, which is unfortunate, and I really need to trace new copies. I'll go ahead and trace a copy of my bodice block back here. I'm going to leave the shoulder dart right where it is, and then once again I will use the waist dart fullness as gathering. I'm actually going to concentrate this gathering along the center back, though I'm not even going to move it over there in the patterning stage. I'm just going to sew it how I wish, and honestly I trust myself enough at this point that that will work out in the end. And because this has buttons down the center front, I can go ahead and cut this on the fold along the center back. I will also include my shoulder pad tilt up here along the shoulder, just give myself a little bit of extra room up here to fit in a little shoulder pad later. I will custom make those at the very end of this video. I'm going to go ahead and measure my neckline on the front and on the back, of course on the front here without the dart fullness, because I need to see what I need to gather this down to, what the original neckline measurement would be. And I'll go ahead and make note of both the front and back so that it can draft a stand collar pattern, where I will begin with a straight line, and I'll just tee off the back of that. I'm going to come out 3 inches, which is my back neckline measurement, and then I will come out another 4.5 inches from there, which is my front neckline measurement for today, just because I lowered that neckline a little bit. Then I need to come up a 1/2 inch at the center front of my collar, and I'm going to use my French curve to taper that back down into the original line. Then I have to decide how tall I want my collar to be. I'm going to go with 1 inch and 1/8 today, which is perhaps a little bit silly, could have just gone with 1 inch, but I decided I wanted a little bit of extra room. And I actually am going to go ahead and have the end of my collar curved today. Normally I just make this pointed, but I'm just going to do a little rounded edge on my collar today. I will go ahead and add a 1/2 inch of seam allowance all along this as well, except for the center back, because I will cut this along the fold. Alright, so I just need my sleeves for my blouse at this point, and I'm actually going to use the bishop sleeve that I drafted in the last sleeve making video here on the channel, so I can link you up to the video where I made this sleeve pattern. I, of course, am not going to use it just as is because I need to add a little bit more puff. No surprise there. So I'll cut along the bicep line here and tape that down, and I'm just going to tilt up the sleeve cap a bit to add in a bit of puff along the sleeve cap as well. The sleeve has plenty of gathering at the cuff, but I want more up here at the sleeve cap. So I'm going to tilt this open 1 inch and 1/4 at the center, I think it was. Can't read my own darn handwriting at this point. But it doesn't really matter. However much you want. The more you tilt this open, the more puff you're adding. You need to add on some height up here as well. Otherwise you just have a gathered sleeve cap as opposed to a puff sleeve cap. If you want it to go up and out, you need to go up. And hopefully you can see what I mean by that. But then even after adding some puff up at the sleeve cap, I decided to widen the sleeve a little bit more as well. So I'm going to cut up the center of the sleeve, the very center of the sleeve, and add in a few more inches of fullness in here. I had considered adding in more fullness here when I was making the sleeve pattern originally, but because I wasn't using it for anything that day, I didn't bother. And today, before I actually cut this out of some silk, I want to widen it even further. Now I have had this silk taffeta I'll be using today kicking around in my stash for well over a year. It's actually a warm, rusty cinnamon color cross-woven with a tealy green, and the resulting iridescent shade really reminds me of that brown, blue, or blue-brown iridescent duochrome loose powder that MAC had a long time ago. I actually still own a vial of this stuff, although it is exceptionally expired, I assume. I haven't tried to use it in a long time. I just still happen to have it in my makeup stash from probably like 2010, who knows. Now, of course, there's Cleona and Terramones, etc. The options for iridescent eyeshadows are far more infinite now than they used to be. And because I will be gathering all of this fullness down into a small little cuff, I will need a slit here in the back of my sleeve that I will have to finish with a little sleeve placket. I have made these sleeve placket patterns and done this sort of operation before here on the channel. I can link you to another video where I make these or where I talk about them in a little bit more detail. And I did start using this particular method of sleeve placketing after seeing it on a blog post, so I can link that original post below for you in the description as well. But essentially I need these two rectangles. One is the slimmer for the first side, the underside of the placket, and then this larger side as well. I am just going to make new copies of these patterns to keep with this blouse that I'm making today. That way I can keep the original copy in my button-down shirt envelope here for when I go to make one of those again in the future. And I did grab my shirt cuff out of this button-down shirt pattern blouse bag and made a new copy for this version as well. My shirt cuff here is just going to be a rectangle, so it just depends on your wrist measurement and how wide you want your shirt cuff. The dimensions for this rectangle, basically. I can't exactly tell you what you should make yours because your wrist and design desires may be different from mine, but I do have full faith in you that you can draw a suitable rectangle. And here is that two-toned silk taffeta. This is rather a lightweight and crispy taffeta, and not to be too on the nose of being seasonally appropriate, the colorway of this silk over at Silk Baron is called Silent Night, and is in no way particularly Christmassy once removed from its name. And I will be able to link this silk below for you in the description if you are interested in your own iridescent taffeta. But I will cut everything out of my fabric here, including 2 layers for the collar. I did go ahead and interface one side of this with some lightweight fusible interfacing, and I'll just pin right sides together, although with this taffeta, of course, the right side and the wrong side are both the same, which is sometimes useful and sometimes confusing, honestly. And before I can get to anything else, the most intimidating part of this whole process are the sleeve plackets, so I'd like to get them out of the way first. And luckily, sensing my concentration, Oliver has arrived to help. Thank goodness. I am drawing on this project today with a silver gel pen, by the way, which is an extremely technical tool, as you can imagine. I would use a white gel pen, but mine has actually dried out and I need to grab one the next time I'm at the craft store, because I do use a white gel pen for projects often enough. And those sort of like disappearing ink pens don't really help me because most of the time I'm sewing with black and you can't see it. Anyhow, I'm going to sew the slimmer or smaller of the rectangles towards the seam side of the back of my sleeve here, and then the larger rectangle with the little notch in it goes on the other side here. Again, reference the blog post below to know exactly what I'm getting up to here, because I hardly understand while I'm doing it, let alone when I'm trying to explain it. I haven't done well in the past, and I don't think we'll improve upon that today, sadly enough. And then I'll take this over to the machine and go ahead and sew on my 1/4 inch indications that I left myself here, just 1/4 inch seam allowance as I sew around the slit here. This is technically on the back side of the sleeve. Again, the fabric is the same on both sides, so how would any of us know? This is the back side of these placket pieces and the back side of the sleeve, technically. Again, you could cut the slit of this afterwards. I think the blog post tells you to cut it first, and so that's just how I've always done it. But it may be easier to draw a rectangle, stitch around the rectangle, and then cut the slit afterwards. I don't know. As with so many things, the order of operations is not exactly fixed. I have cut the top of the box into a little triangle here, so I can turn everything to the right side of my sleeve. Just press that all into place. We're basically creating a little, enclosed, trimmed window here, just so that I can get in and out of these cuffs later on. You could, of course, just use a wider sleeve cuff and then put elastic or a tie inside as well. I have done that sort of thing in other blouses before here on the channel, and I can link up to a completely different, slightly more swashbuckling version of a silk blouse that I've made, where I did include elasticized cuffs instead. But I'll fold down this first side of the placket, folding the raw edge in 1/4 inch, and then folding this into about a 1/2 inch wide under plackety thing. Does any of this have an official name? Hard to say. The wind is a-stormin' outside. It's a bright sunny day, although it was snowing a little bit earlier, but the wind is just going nuts outside. I have a wind chime that came with the house, and it's making a lot of noise downstairs. As are my double pane windows, and when I say double pane, I mean I have storm windows on the outside of my house and the original 1890s windows on the inside of the house, with about a 2-inch gap in between them. That's not an actual double pane, but it is the the vintage version that I've got. I was intending for this to be a sort of fun, easy project for myself, but alas, with all this plackety nonsense going on and with a couple of machine issues, it turned out to take me 2 days longer than I had hoped. So really, was this a quick and easy project for me? No. But at least I really love this color of silk, and I've been waiting a long time to use it. And I'll just stitch down that first side of my placket, and then I can pin the other side into place properly. Again, folding it in on itself and zhuzhing things around until they behave behind my lint-covered t-shirt shoulder. Honestly. And the only bummer about using taffeta for this sort of thing is that it does show every single, discrepancy of tension. So you do have to be kind of careful with the tension on the machine, and just in general you have to accept that there's going to be a certain level of wrinkling, which is why I go for iridescent taffeta, because then at least the first thing you notice about wrinkles in a taffeta like this is that, ooh, look how iridescent it is, as opposed to, ooh, look how wrinkled that is. But you have to accept a certain amount of crunchiness when it comes to taffeta. It's just par for the course when it comes to this particular textile. A shantung is slightly more forgiving, and a dupioni is slightly more forgiving again. Although both of those are a more slubbed and raw-looking silk, and are known for being slightly less expensive, and therefore are considered slightly less luxurious, I think, but I still think of dupioni silk as very luxurious and fun. For example, you can't really use it for historic costuming if you want to be 100% accurate, but you definitely can use it for historic costuming if you just want to have a good time. Now, unusually for me, I am actually going to use French seams on this blouse today, just to keep everything super clean in this lovely silk. So I'm actually sewing wrong sides together here with a 1/4 inch seam allowance for my underarm seam, and it does feel very unnatural to me because I don't often use French seams, and it just it twists my brain in a way I don't like. And I will go ahead and trim that seam allowance down to 1/8 of an inch and try and press this tiny, tiny baby seam that I have left into submission here. And then I will turn this wrong side out and then re-pinch this seam. Again, French seams. It's just not my favorite. I know they're very contained and very clean, but I always say you have to sew things twice because I sewed the seam already once. Here I am having to sew it again. And it just seems silly to me to do twice as much work. But of course, if I'm not using a French seam, usually I'm using seam binding or serging the raw edges, and that is also more work. So it's no more work to do a French seam. It just seems that way to my particular silly little brain. Once that nice clean seam is finished, I will go ahead and give it another press. And I will actually just go ahead and finish off these sleeves entirely before I even start constructing the body of the blouse. So I am going to put my gathering stitching in here along the cuff, so I can gather this down into the actual cuff, I suppose. I guess the hem of the sleeve, and then this is the cuff. And you can see how I have pressed my cuff to prepare it. And of course this depends on what seam allowance you have left yourself. I have 1/2 inch along the long sides and 1/4 inch along the short sides. So that is what I have pressed in here. And you can see I did interface those as well to give them a little bit more structure, because again, this is a very thin and crispy fabric. I will tie off my gathering stitching on one side, and then I have to gather this entire hem down into this tiny little cuff. And actually, again, more could fit inside of here, but I couldn't make the sleeve much wider and fit it onto my fabric without getting creative. So, you know, you have to find a compromise between how big your sleeves are going to be and how fiddly you want things to be putting them together. And gathering this much fabric into a tiny cuff like this is, of course, facilitated by how thin and crispy this taffeta is, but also would be a total nightmare if you were only using one line of gathering stitching. So always use 2, if not, honestly, bumping it up to 3 lines of gathering stitching parallel 1/8 apart. It's going to make gathering something down in a flat way and being able to distribute those gathers and move them around so much easier than trying to just use a single line of gathering stitching. And I will take this over to the machine and stitch this into place. Honestly, I should have the gathering facing the other direction. I think proper practice is always to have your gathering facing the feed dogs, because the feed dogs always bunch things up a little bit on their own as well. But you know, those are guidelines, clearly not actual rules. I always say sewing and piracy have a lot in common. Certainly the swearing, for example. Alright, since I have pre-pressed all of this, I can kind of fold everything back down into place, hide all my seam allowance into the actual cuff itself, this tiny little baby cuff. You can just slip stitch this or fell this along the inside. I'm actually going to hand stitch the ends of this shut, but throw machine stitching along the gathering here, just keeping it right along the edge, so I guess edge stitching this down into place, hoping that the other side gets caught. If you're really brave, instead of edge stitching, you can stitch in the ditch, but I'm not that brave. I've never been able to make stitching in the ditch work. I remember the technique's name from school, and I'm sure I had to practice it for like a sample, but I haven't used it since, because it's just not for me. And again, I am just going to hand stitch, actually fell, or like whip stitch the very ends of this shut. You could slip stitch this, but my thread matched my fabric so well that you couldn't even see it, so I just did what was fastest and easiest for me. And later on, of course, I will have to add a buttonhole and button onto this cuff to make it functional as well, but everything is now at least cleanly finished down here at the cuff, including the placket. It's a lot of work just for the sleeves, which is also something I forgot, that the sleeves themselves are going to take me an entire afternoon. I feel like I used to be so much faster with my sewing projects, and with all things, honestly. I'm not sure exactly what's slowing me down. I'd like to not think it's age, but then again, the amount of gray hair I have going on these days, I guess begs to differ. Anyhow, after all of that nonsense with the sleeves, I can go ahead and just pinch and pin and sew from the large end off of the tip for the shoulder darts on the back of my blouse. I do think I need a new set of pins here. I need to relegate these to the back of a drawer and just get a whole new box and restart my counting system, because things have fallen by the wayside a little. And speaking of cats, I do try and keep track of my pins quite closely just in case they decide to get any dangerous ideas, which they do occasionally, but they actually are pretty well behaved, and they don't really mess with my stuff unless I'm using it. They're far less interested in all my things if I'm not busy with them. But with my darts stitched and pressed, I can go ahead and add in my gathering stitching along the waistline of my back piece here, and then also along the waistline and neckline of the front pieces as well. Lots of gathering to be done on this one. And I will use French seams again to actually assemble the blouse itself, the side seams and the shoulder seams here, sewing those wrong sides together first with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, trimming that down, pressing everything back into place in the opposite direction, and then stitching again. And a little secret here is that while I'm stitching, I've actually switched to a purple thread in my bobbin, not because that matched in any way, shape, or form, but just because my bobbin winder had stopped winding. And I hoped it was just a temporary problem that needed to, I don't know, somehow reset itself. But alas, instead, foreshadowing. And I will finally sew around the edge of my collar, which I had pinned first for this project and then kind of left by the wayside and forgot about. Oh, Sophia has just come back into the room, surely to complain about my paying attention to my work and not her again. They wake up and come to bother me the minute they hear that I'm working. It's a good thing they're so darn cute, and they really are. And now she's on her crackling paper. The Sophia ASMR continues. But yes, trim down my seam allowances, turn those to the other side, and pin them again. Because French seams. Why sew something once when you can sew it twice? And I will clip the curves and trim the seam allowance of my collar piece as well, so I can turn this right side out and press it into place. One could of course add some understitching, edge stitching, top stitching, decorative embroidery, embellishment, etc. onto something like this. I will do none of those things today, but I'm just saying the options are there, of course. I'm just going to press this nice and smooth here, although I do think I need to refill the iron if I want to use any steam at this point. Let me go ahead and start stitching those French seams back over on the machine. Round 2 of the seamage, and you can see the Gutermann dark green teal colored thread that's about to betray me further and further. I don't know, the machine and this thread were just not getting along. It wasn't just the bobbin. I will go ahead and press my finished seams, and I can start working on the button placket. Of course, I'm going to start doing this thinking that I'm working on the side that needs the buttonholes, but in the end, I'm actually turned around and this is the side that just needs the buttons. But I'll show you how I fold one of these for the hidden button placketiness of it all, even though this side doesn't need to have the extra flap. I'm going to fold this placket under the first 1.5 inches, which is kind of the facing of this. Then I need to fold it 1.5 inches again. There we go. Trying to keep things straight. I only really make something like this once a year, maybe maximum, and so I always forget what the heck I'm up to. Then I can fold this back on itself so that we can find the 3/4 inch flappity, like so. And it's all finished on the inside here. This is the inside of the fabric we're looking at. Again, with taffeta, it looks the same. And then the outside, of course, would be quote-unquote perfectly smooth if I weren't working with the taffeta. Now, because this is a lightweight taffeta, I am going to interface where the buttons will be sewn on here. So I'm just throwing a little bit of interfacing in here, and then I will fold it back how I had it a moment ago, just to give things a little bit of additional stability. I'm actually going to keep all this extra fabric in this little sandwich as well, even though with the button side you don't really need all this. You could cut it back, cut off 1.5 inches, and just use the first 1.5 inches of fold over. Because as it is right now, this has, here I am noticing, I'm on this side. I see the 2 flaps here, which is great for the hidden side of the placket, but this doesn't actually need this. So I will go ahead and just stitch this shut so that that opening doesn't exist between the 2 layers. It is all just in one. Does this make any sense? No. I could title this video, How Not to Add a Hidden Placket. I mean, technically it all works in the end, but I'm not saying this is best practice, all right? I am just one little human making it up as I go along, you know? Now, one could just rely on the buttons that will be sewn down to this to keep all these layers in place, or you could machine stitch this, again, top stitch it, especially on like a cotton shirt, for example. But to keep this placket as non-noticeable as possible, I'm actually going to use a long and short stitch and kind of hem this area by hand, taking a tiny stitch into the blouse itself, and then a longer stitch into the folded placket, and then another tiny stitch into the fabric. Onward, down to the waist. This does allow me to completely control the tension here as well because I'm sewing it by hand, which is useful, again, in a prone to wrinkling taffeta. I have actually worked with taffeta that is a lighter weight than this before. This is like a single layer plain woven taffeta, but I've worked with some like tissue taffeta before, and that is not particularly fun, I'll be honest. This is perfectly fine, very crispy, and it holds a pressed edge so well. But I will go ahead and add interfacing to the other side of my placket, so I can actually do the hidden buttonhole side of this properly this time. Although, again, I do think this is the sort of thing where it's reversed for men's versus women's buttonholes and buttons, which I never think makes any sense because no one's being dressed by a lady's maid anyway. So just put the buttons and the buttonholes on the side you prefer. And Sophia's making noise in her paper again. Thank you, my love. It's because she wants me to play with her toy. Play with her, basically, as opposed to doing my editing. which is also why the videos tend to take me a tiny bit longer now as well. It just turns out that when you add cats into the process, it changes the process. Funny how that is. Anyhow, on this side, I actually remembered that I need to hem the very top of this placket area, which I did not do the first time, so I actually had to unpick a little bit of the first side and finish this up by hand, but here I am actually going to fold the very top edge of this in on itself to cleanly finish this. There will be a point of weakness here once the collar is attached, and I'll show you how I deal with that later on in the video. But once again, on this side, after I have everything tucked and pressed into place, I will use that long and short stitch, sort of a hem stitch, to finish off this side of the placket as well. Although, you know, you look away for 1 second and look what happens. What was I saying about these little goobins slowing down the process? This whole table, and where does he choose to sit? On top of the blouse itself. It's a good thing he's such a sweet, precious boy who just wants to be close to me. And it's hard to fault him for that because it is such a unique opinion. Anyhow, once I've actually completed my hand sewing without a cat getting in the way, I was trying to decide if I wanted to stitch down the interfaced side of the collar or the just plain old taffeta side of the collar around the neckline first, and I decided to go, of course, with the interfaced version for the stability of it all. Why I was questioning it? Not sure. Perhaps I was slightly distracted. Couldn't tell you why. But let me go ahead and tie off my gathering stitching on one side here and pin it down, fit it down into my collar. I will have to do, of course, the same to the other side as well. And I'm actually used to doing this with more gathering up at the neckline, so this was no problem at all to fit this in here. I do very much miss how productive I used to be, by the way. I don't know what's gotten into me over the last couple of years. The completely unbalanced situation has finally caught up with me at last, and while I used to be epically productive, now I can barely get my act together at all, so it's really a shame. And I have no good excuse even for myself, which can prove psychologically problematic. But believe me, I am constantly wishing I could get more done, or have more to show for myself over here. Hopefully I'll be able to reconfigure things a little bit, maybe next year, now that a lot of the major things, at least in the ground floor of my house, are a bit more put together. Of course, some people would argue that I should, actually insert myself into the community and try and make friends and find a dentist, but that sounds way too healthy. Cut it out. And here is where I really wanted a matching bobbin and was trying to get my darn bobbin winder to, wind a bobbin at all. It had been kind of on the fritz for a few months now, but it was simply not turning any longer. So I ended up taking the entire bobbin winding mechanism off of the machine, taking it all apart, realigning the spring, which I think was fine to begin with. But basically I was doing the mechanical version of unplugging it and plugging it back in, taking everything apart, putting it all back together, re-oiling it, putting it back on the machine, and luckily it then worked. In fact, it now works better than it has in a year, so obviously I should have just done this earlier. Perhaps the machine is acting out, seeing as I've neglected so much sewing this year to get things painted. Old wallpaper glue scrubbed off, flooring replaced, fun stuff like that. But I will go ahead and clip any extra curves or threads that need clipping, and then I can turn my collar all inside into itself. I did actually trim some of the seam allowance away in the gathered section just to keep this as smooth as I could up here. But I'm going to hide all of the sins inside the collar. This is actually the inside of the blouse here. And I'll fold under the seam allowance and pin this down into place. And then, unlike on the sleeve cuffs where I randomly sewed it with a machine, I will actually stitch this down on the inside here by hand. And the cat is complaining because I'm not flicking her feather around. My love, I cannot flick the feather around all day. Sophie thinks that playing with the feather wand is very important compared to any other task I make it up to. But while I'm hand sewing the inside of this collar down, I do need to remember to put some reinforcing stitches in between the placket and the collar right here in this corner zone. I am usually using a coordinating color thread, so this doesn't bother me to have this little stitch here, and it does help reinforce this area where there's a zone of weakness in my pattern. But after I've hand stitched the collar into place, it's time to start thinking about the waistband, and for that I've just cut a long rectangle of fabric, about 3.5 inches wide and about 36 inches long or so, just giving myself plenty of room to work with here. And I will interface this piece of taffeta to give it a little bit of extra stability. I will then find the center of this long strip, and that will be my center back that I can line up with the blouse itself. And then I will just measure the original waistline for both the front and back patterns, what the waistline should be without the dart fullness included, because of course that's what I need to gather all of this down to. Hopefully that makes any sense. All of the fit at the waist is going to be defined by how much I gather this blouse down into this waistband. So the waistband being the correct measurements, the waistband being the correct length is really what determines whether or not my blouse will fit in the end. So I'm being very careful to make sure I have that correct, measuring things twice before I stitch them into place, things like that. And I will match up the center back and the side seams first and then gather everything down to fit, as you can see I'm doing here for the center back. And again, always use 2 lines of gathering stitching to facilitate this. It will make your life so much easier. And I'll do the same sort of thing with the front. Just pin that down where it needs to be size-wise along the waistband so I know where my center front will end up. Then I will tie off one side of my gathering stitching and then pull things down to fit underneath the apex here where a dart would normally be. But today I have gathering, which again does make me feel a little bit like this is an 1890s shirtwaist masquerading as a modern blouse. The only difference really is that I've made this to go over my actual body and a bra as opposed to a corset and a corset cover, I suppose. But really, if you were to do the same sort of operations, starting with a base that fits over a corset, this would not be a costume blouse. Where does a shirtwaist end and a blouse begin in the history of women's fashion? It's kind of hard to say, honestly. Especially seeing as in the 1950s, they were wearing blouses over things that looked very much like a corset, or very fancy girdles that were practically corsets anyhow. So how much had really changed over those decades? It's kind of hard to say. Things went back and forth, as they always tend to do in fashion. But once I have that waistband stitched on, I can just clip my curves where necessary to facilitate ironing this smooth, and I will press it into submission, as I always say. Press the seam allowance into the waistband itself, just like I finished off the sleeve cuffs earlier. And on the side here where I'm going to have the buttons, so this is the left side of my blouse, I am just going to trim the waistband down and then fold things into place nicely along the inside. I will again hand stitch this, just slip stitch this along the inside, as opposed to stitching it by machine, which is what I had done on the sleeve cuffs. So why I didn't continue with that? Probably because that Gutermann thread that matched best was giving me so much trouble. And I was like, well, might as well just switch to doing it by hand if the machine and the thread aren't going to get along. I have heard a rumor that the twist on Gutermann thread doesn't always get along best with these old machines, but mine works 90% of the time, so this one spool giving me trouble isn't really going to change my mind about using Gutermann thread, especially because that's what Mood has, and what am I going to do? Run to Joann's? That's right, I can't. So I'm just deciding what buttons I want and where. I try and align the first chosen buttonhole with the apex, as that is the largest circumference measurement of my body that is most likely to put strain on the blouse, so it's nice to have a button there, of course. And I'm willing to bet anyone who's above a C cup and has ever tried to wear a button-up shirt knows what I mean. So I kind of determine that central apex level buttonhole first and then figure out the rest of the placement based on that. And I will be making 1/2-inch buttonholes today using my 1940s mechanical buttonholer attachment over on the machine. And the eagle-eyed amongst you can see here that I have switched to some teal Coats & Clark thread, which was the closest color I had on hand that would work for this. Luckily, this is a hidden button placket, so you won't really see this in the end. I would have preferred a different shade, I have to say, but my machine was just not getting along with that particular spool of Gutermann's, so I switched over to Coats & Clark to try and get this done. I did test about 3 buttonholes on some spare fabric before I made that discovery, by the way, so always make a test buttonhole, and until you're happy with that, do not start working on your project, because a little machine like this will eat your project right out from under you if you're not careful. And then, as previously suggested, you will be cursing like a pirate. I know I was when that first bobbin was creating a thread mess on the underside of the buttonholes. Believe me. Somewhere deep down, I was very thankful that they were just test buttonholes, but in the moment I was more just frustrated. But I will open up these buttonholes carefully with my seam ripper, and of course I will need to use them to mark on the other placket, the opposite placket, where I need to sew the buttons on. I'm using some dark tan-ish shell buttons here. Just what I happen to have that would work. And I will finally trim down the other side of my waistband and finish this off. I'm going to be putting, that's right, a skirt hook on the inside of this waistband. No one is surprised. I love a skirt hook around here. I use them for far more purposes than they are probably intended. We'll do that off camera so that I can sit down. That's right. And I forgot, might want to put your buttonhole onto the cuff of your sleeves as well, silly. I'd actually already taken the attachment off the machine and put it away, so I had to get everything back out. But once I had the button sewn on, I had to start thinking about sewing my sleeves onto the blouse itself, but also how I needed to finish things off with a couple of shoulder pads. Since I had made that pattern modification, I couldn't really leave this step out. So to create something a little slimmer than a store-bought shoulder pad, I did just go ahead and layer 3 pieces of felt together and give them a quick stitch, just basting those together, and then I used some leftover silk to cut out some matching semicircles, stitched those along the curve, trimmed that down, and pressed them right side out. And then as you can see, I'm just slipping my layered felt concoction inside and trying to steam these into a bit of a curve. But essentially at this point the blouse is now finished and the sleeves are now finished, and it's time to join them together. So I'm going to go ahead and find the underarm seam of my first sleeve here and match that up with the side seam. I do have gathering stitching in the top of my sleeve cap as well, since I extended those to have some puff. But I'm going to pin up from the side seam towards the shoulder, and then I will of course have extra fabric because of the puff I added, so I'll gather that down to fit, trying to keep the gathering concentrated but also evenly distributed up near the shoulder. Oliver is devouring a feather toy behind us, so apologies for the headphone users if you can pick that up. But I will do the same for the other side here, again gathering my sleeve cap down to fit. We can't play with a feather toy all evening, and all morning, and all day. Y'all are obsessed. You're supposed to be fully grown and sleepy. What happened here? And you may be able to spot that I did finish my raw edges in here. I serged the arm side opening and then the edge of the sleeve cap itself as well, just because I wasn't going to finish this in any other way. But back over to the machine and my now trusty Coats & Clark to finish this off. And here's my little puff sleeve. All right. And here's the rest of the blouse. Everything is all finished and clean and pretty on the inside even. And I just need to go ahead and tack in my matching shoulder pads. So I'm just going to give this a little bit of a press, and then I'll line these shoulder pads up the center of the pad along the shoulder seam itself. And I'm just going to throw a few small stitches on the seam allowance up here at the shoulder seam near the neck, and then into the seam allowance of the sleeve puff at the edge. And these do extend about 3/4 of an inch into the sleeve itself, which helps hold the puff out as well. And as this is a silk blouse where I did not pre-wash the fabric, it's pretty much dry clean only, so I would snip these shoulder pads out before I took this blouse to the cleaners. But it is my practice to wear a very, very thin t-shirt under something like this. That way I need to wash the t-shirt as opposed to the silk blouse, which is how I can wear something like this multiple times without even having to think about having to wash it. And here is my finished iridescent silk taffeta blouse. And I think I ride the line sometimes between chic and comfortable when lowering the neckline, and unfortunately I think I hit comfortable instead of chic this time. It's a little too low in the front and it's doing some strange things. Of course, this is all fixed by me A, not mentioning it, and B, throwing on the matching brocade vest. And luckily this blouse will fit right into my wardrobe, as I made so many teal and brown and coppery sort of verdigris themed things a couple of years back for that lookbook, which if you happen to have not seen, I will link for you in a card here. I put a lot of work into those little fashion shows, and it was my intent to find a house where I could build another set like that, but sadly this one did not come with an attic with a large enough, ceiling height, nor the basement. The basement is far too creepy, so we'll have to see if I can ever figure out a workaround. And even though this was a slightly simpler project, thank you as always for watching today, and a huge thank you to my patrons who make my work and these videos possible. I want to wish you a very happy holidays and a happy new year, and I'll be back here with more sewing, vintage fashion, costuming, crafting, and decorating real soon, so I'll see you then. Bye! And an extra special thank you to Alicia, AM Person, Amy, Ashanti, Audra, Bethany, Concetta, Karina, Denise, Diana, Elizabeth, Ellen, Elona, Eloquent Silence, Eric, Fatal But Not Serious, Franzi, Haley, Hesufina, Jambonium, Janet, Jenny, Lainey, Laura, Lynn H. and Lynn O, Mac, Maggie, Margaret, Marie, Megan, Melody, Myrna, Michelle, Mo, Natalie, Nina, Paula, Rachamus, Sarah, Sarah F., Sean, Stephanie, Susie, Tifo, Isabel, Thea, Tiffany, and Ula. And thank you to all of my patrons and all of you who watch these videos. I could not continue to do what I do without your help, so thank you.